Welcome to Ohio Roots, the official podcast of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Join us as we embark on a captivating journey through Ohio's rich genealogy, history, and abundant resources. Hosted by me, OGS Executive Director Noel Poirier, this podcast brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests, from OGS members, chapter leaders, and staff to renowned genealogists, historians, and influential figures within the genealogical community. Each episode delves into fascinating topics and captivating stories. So grab your headphones, hit that play button, and join us on this enthralling journey of Ohio's roots. Our guest today on the OGS Ohio Roots podcast is Sally Whiting Short, an educator, publishing professional, and genealogist whose love of history led her to write Filled with Fortitude, Pilgrim Elizabeth Tilley. Her novel tells the inspiring story of her 13-year-old Mayflower ancestor and the women who helped shape early America. Now retired in Virginia, Sally continues to share her passion for history through her volunteer work with the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation and the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. Please welcome Sally Whiting Short to OGS Ohio Roots podcast. Well, Sally Whiting, thank you so much for joining me today on the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. I appreciate you taking some time to be with me today.
I'm very happy you invited me. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to start with a question I ask every guest on the episode, on the podcast, which is, how was it you found your initial interest and how did genealogy get its hooks into you?
It actually was through my cousin. I have a cousin who is no longer with us who did the genealogy to determine whether we were Mayflower descendants. And so it was through him that I discovered that I was, in fact, a Mayflower descendant. And that's what started everything off for me and literally changed my whole life.
Okay. So it was that initial connection then?
Yes, that was the initial connection.
So, and that initial connection, because I mentioned your book in the intro, how did you discover this connection to your Pilgrim ancestor, Elizabeth Tilley?
Well, through the Mayflower ancestry, I discovered that I was descended from Elizabeth Tilley and John Howland, who were both passengers on the Mayflower, and learned that my ancestor, the woman, was only 13 when she boarded the Mayflower. And that just made me very curious. Then I found out she had been orphaned. She lost both her parents before they even got off the ship. And yet she lived to marry a man who was 15 years older than she was. And they had 10 children, all of whom lived. And they ended up with 86 grandchildren. And there are like 3 million descendants from them today. So I'm not the only Howland descendant, but that's what piqued my curiosity. And I thought, what a story she would have to tell. And that's what got me interested in writing my book.
And that kind of gets us to the book itself, because the book is a narrative, correct? So it's not simply a historical book.
It is a historical book. It's historical. I have to call it fiction because it's a novel.
Mm-hmm.
All of the history is based on the genealogy, on the facts that come from the primary sources, okay, particularly of Plymouth Plantation and Mort's relation, and, land records, all kinds of legal documents, et cetera, et cetera. So everything that is in my book is factual as far as the events are concerned. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to bring the story to life and give a voice to Elizabeth and these passengers that were on the Mayflower while things were happening to them, to bring it to life. There was nothing else out there like that, especially about the women and children. So
when you're doing this, when you're researching this, and when you're writing it, how are you balancing the historical accuracy that you get from the documents and those types of things, but then balance that with kind of the storytelling you need to do if you're going to tell a narrative.
I only put in those historical events that we have a record of.
Hmm.
So, and anything that impacted her life and John's life, the Howlands' life in particular, it was very difficult making those decisions because the novel got way longer than I wanted it to be,
Hmm.
and I kept having to cut. And then I would add, and then I would cut. But basically, I kept those historical facts in that had an impact on their life. And so that was how I made that
Yeah.
choice.
Can you give me kind of an example from the book of the historical event and then how you built the narrative around that?
Um, we know that the this group of people, this they call them Reformed Christians now rather than separatists. The group that had separated themselves from the Church of England and were in trouble in England because of that. They they needed financial backing. They couldn't afford to get over there themselves,
Hmm.
and so they were backed by some financial investors called the adventurers. And they had an agreement that by 1627, 7 years after they got over there, they would divide up all the profits from everything that they had been able to do in the colonies at that time. But nothing worked out that way. They couldn't send anything to London for years and years and years. And so they were in arrears, and the adventurers wanted their money.
Hmm.
And Elizabeth's husband, John Howland, decides that he's going to be one of the undertakers. He volunteers with one of 7 men to undertake that debt. And it totally impacts their life, everything that happens after that. John ends up going up to a trading post and working there as a manager for 8 years. Elizabeth is left behind. They have a terrible time paying off this debt because there's no records kept. So that debt goes on for years and years and years. And that's a huge part of the story, actually. It's something that we never learn about in school. You know, how did the finances work on this whole story and the building of Plymouth Colony?
When you were researching this, I mean, you mentioned some records from Plymouth Plantation. What were some of the other resources that you really pulled from in order to flesh out her story?
I worked with, speaking of genealogy, Robert Charles Anderson's series of The Great Migration. Those 4 volumes, I relied on those heavily and went through and spent a great deal of time researching every passenger that we know was on that Mayflower. And from that, I could get information about everybody's ages, their backgrounds, how many children they had, the names of their children. And so when I was thinking about the interrelationships between people on the ship before and after they got off, I was able to determine which women had children at the same time that Elizabeth did, who her children would have played with, all these kinds of things that helped me with those relationships. So um, that had a great deal to do with it. Archaeological evidence is something I relied on heavily. Um, the artifacts that were found at the homestead where Elizabeth and John lived, and I relied on experts getting their input on what was accurate or not as far as Pilgrim history. And I actually visited a lot of the sites. Anything that I could go to physically. So all these things made a difference. And I read for an entire year before I even started writing. Just read and read and read everything that I could, fiction and nonfiction, so that I could become familiar with what it was all about.
In the process of doing all of that research on your ancestor, what were some surprising discoveries that jumped out at you?
Do you know, Noel, probably the single most surprising thing to me was what these people, all of them, whether they were part of the religious group or not, what they had to go through, the challenges they faced, the hardships they went through, what they suffered through during those first few years is unbelievable. It's mind-boggling. I didn't realize that besides their own hunger and trying to, survive right away, they had made an agreement with the local Indians that they would come to each other's aid. And when they held their little harvest festival that first year, just because that was something that was commonly done in Europe, and they set off a couple of muskets in celebration, 90 Indians showed up, 90 men, totally unexpected, after they had finally got a little bit of food and stayed with them for 3 days and ate and ate and ate. And then a ship shows up, totally unexpected, with 35 people who brought nothing with them, expecting to live, to move in, and they were totally unprepared for that. That happened again and again and again, where they just were faced with all these odds that they had never expected. So my respect for these people, for all the passengers on the Mayflower, just skyrocketed. And I can't tell you how grateful I feel that they were there for us and what they did. That was the most surprising thing.
Hi, everyone. Noel Poirier here, Executive Director of the Ohio Genealogical Society and your host for the Ohio Roots podcast. Did you know you can help preserve the past and empower the future? Your donation to the Ohio Genealogical Society helps protect vital family history records and supports research for generations to come. Visit www.ogs.org/donate and give today. Thank you so much for your support. Join us on Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025, for the Mavernine Harshman OGS Librarian Day, a special event at the Ohio Genealogical Society Library designed for librarians, society members, and anyone passionate about genealogy and local history. The day begins with a collaborative session on successful genealogy programming ideas led by the Northeast Ohio local family history librarians, and the afternoon continues with a panel discussion on how libraries support genealogical research in today's evolving landscape. A guided tour of the OGS Library and Archives rounds out the day with opportunities for independent research and exploration. Whether you're looking for a programming inspiration, research strategies, or community connection, this event offers valuable takeaways for all. For more information and to register, visit the OGS events calendar at www.ogs.org/events. You mentioned challenges for them. What was some of the biggest challenges for you in just trying to bring Elizabeth's story to life?
Finding the time to write. I didn't ever expect to write a novel. It had been on my bucket list. When I decided to do this, I had this vision of, hear about authors that get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and they write till 10 and then they go for a walk. And, I had this is going to be my self-discipline. Life just got in the way, and finding uninterrupted time to write was the single most difficult thing that I had to do, because every interruption, being a new writer and not understanding this, everything from the phone ringing, somebody coming to the door, just somebody saying hello, you're in a mindset in your story, and then that gets interrupted, and you have to get back into that mindset again. So That was the single most challenging thing. And it took me 6 years, but it has been extremely fulfilling because I wanted to bring the story of these people to life. I wanted to tell about the women and children. I wanted my children and my grandchildren to feel proud of my ancestors. And I actually didn't expect to publish it for public consumption until I got into it and realized, as my husband said, this was an opportunity to teach and educate people about the real story instead of just telling the myths. And it's been extremely fulfilling because those people who have read it, especially the descendants, have enjoyed it and appreciated it and thanked me for it. So that has felt good.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to my next question. What are you hoping that readers of the book take away from Elizabeth's story, and particularly the experiences of women and children from the Mayflower history?
Basically, that the women and children, well, first of all, as I said, to appreciate what these people did and what they went through, but to to make it clear that the women, particularly the women, had way more impact and influence on what went on in those early days than they're ever given credit for. When the men were first trying to build some kind of shelters, the first winter they got there, and the women were left on the ship while the men were off the ship. And this is when the general sickness struck, and they lost 50% of their people, 50 people out of the 102. And 30% of those people were children, which I think a lot of people don't recognize. The women were left on that ship in what was more or less a petri dish and had to look after the sick, take care of the children, keep things going. Um, had it not been for the women, they never would have made it. So I wanted to give them a voice and make it clear what they went through. There were only 6 married women, mothers of families, that got off that ship when they finally vacated the ship. And 2 of them died within the first couple of months. So there were only 4 women left, and all these children, and 24 men. And these women and the girls, including my ancestor, had to take care of all of these children and all of these men because that's what they were expected to do, to cook for them, to mend, to do their laundry. They worked hard, these women did. That was a real eye opener.
Obviously, she was an ancestor of yours. We you know that. But in researching her life, were there ways that you came to kind of personally relate to her journey, where you kind of connected in a different level than just being simply a descendant?
It was more just being a descendant. I don't know about you, but when you look into your ancestry, do you not wonder sometimes what characteristics you inherit? And I wanted my character to be a strong woman. I think she was a woman of faith, for sure, as was her husband. I mean, he almost drowned. He went off the ship in the middle of the voyage. And that's my ancestor that was saved by a halyard. It was during a storm. And just by sheer coincidence, this halyard, this rope, was hanging in the water. And he grabbed that rope and saved his life. Or a lot of people wouldn't be around today. And so that was considered by all of them a miracle. And I think he saw it that way too. And so did Elizabeth. And so the faith part of them, their beliefs, who they were all the way to the end of her life, where she makes it clear to her children that she wants them to live in fear of the Lord. Um, and I think she had 3 siblings that did not come. So the fact that she did tells me she was curious and believed in what they were doing. And so I see those characteristics in her. But I more or less tried to put myself in her shoes and figure what would I do in her circumstances. But I learned also a lot from the interpreters who have played her role. I talked to 4 different women in 4 different years who played her role at Plymouth Patuxent. And I talked to 2 women who trained the interpreters, one while it was Plymouth Plantation and one Plymouth Patuxent, to see what they thought of her as a person. So I got a lot of input from those experts as well.
I assume you don't consider you didn't consider yourself an expert on 17th century pilgrim history before you started your research.
Not
So,
at all.
so in the process of doing that research and in the process of writing it, what did you discover that just kind of deeply moved you or changed how you view that era in American history?
Um, I think I appreciated more afterwards, even though I had learned about the Mayflower Compact. I didn't understand the significance of 2 things, actually. Um, One is that before they had to land, or they weren't expecting to land, so the Virginia Charter no longer applied to what was going to be their form of government. They had to agree, all these men, whether they were part of the religious group or not, and it was about half and half, they had to agree that they were going to have some form of government they could all live with. And they decided for the very first time to make their own laws and abide by those laws. And the impact of that really, really hit home with me for the first time, what we have to appreciate about them. Um, this was a huge input. The other thing is they didn't last as long as we just think they all lived happily ever after, and it didn't turn out that way at all. Their dream did not turn out to be what they thought it was going to be, because everything changed. People moved off, they scattered, and Massachusetts Bay Colony came in, the Puritans came in, and they caused problems with the Indians, which is actually what the other thing I was going to say. They were the only group of Europeans that came in that had a positive, friendly relationship with the local Indians. They set up almost right away with Massasoit and he was the sachem and his group at Okanoket, it's the name of the village. We think it's the Wampanoags, but they didn't call themselves that then. So those 2 things I respect them greatly for. And it could have turned out much different had it not turned out, that Massachusetts Bay Colony had not
Yeah.
started up there. So I respect that. I learned a lot.
So if someone were to reach out to you and say, I'm thinking about doing something similar with my ancestor, what's the best piece of advice you're going to give someone trying to duplicate your efforts?
Don't give up. Put your mind to it. You can do it. It takes work, but if you want to do it, you can do it, and it's never too late to do it. Um, I was 76 when I started my project. That was 6 years ago. and I'm glad I did it. I wouldn't do a sequel, although several people have asked me if I would. But anyone that wants to can, by using logic and by using genealogical clues and primary clues and archaeological clues and help from historians, you can do this, and your imagination. And it's a challenge and very, very rewarding. I've loved it.
Well, Sally, thank you so much for joining me today on the Ohio Roots podcast to talk about your book, Filled with Fortitude, Pilgrim Elizabeth Tilley. I really appreciate the time you took to speak with me today, and I look forward to getting a chance to look at the book myself.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, it was really a pleasure speaking with Sally Whiting Short and hearing about her journey as a genealogist and author. Her novel, Filled with Fortitude, Pilgrim Elizabeth Tilley, offers a moving glimpse into the courage and resilience of one of America's earliest settlers. It reminds us also of the power of uncovering and preserving our own family stories. So I want to thank Sally for coming on today to the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. I hope you enjoy listening to it, and we'll talk to you again soon. Curious about your family's Ohio past? The Ohio Genealogical Society is your gateway to uncovering generations of family history. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just starting your journey, the OGS offers expert resources, local chapters, exclusive online records, online and in-person programs, and a passionate community ready to help you. Join today and bring your family story to life, because your family's history matters. Visit ogs.org to start your discoveries.
The Ohio Roots podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. Hosted by OGS Executive Director Mill Poyer and edited by Luke Poyer. Theme song is Beautiful Ohio, recorded by Bob Stanley and his orchestra in 1944. To learn more about joining the Ohio Genealogical Society, visit www.ogs.org.